He and his closest friend and partner, Stephen Caracappa, were paid $4,000 a month by Gaspipe Casso, the underboss and Lucchese family. They were passing sensitive police information, FBI information, DEA information to Gaspipe. I mean, most importantly, what they were doing was identifying who the informants were, right? And then they were paid a bonus to facilitate the murder of those informants. And they did various degrees of help. I mean, anything from just providing the home address to, at least in one case, pulling the trigger themselves.
Hey everyone, welcome to another sit down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is very good, very blessed on this end, my friends. And as always, I give all the praise, honor, glory, and thanksgiving to our God for that. I have a special guest today. He's a gentleman by the name of Michael Cannell. He wrote a very interesting book. It's a crazy book, actually. It's called Blood and the Badge, and the subtitle is The Mafia, Two Killer Cops, and a Scandal that Shocked the Nation. And it certainly did, and this was during my time. It was about two cops. There were two rogue cops that operated within the confines of the Genovese family. You know, one of the 5 New York Mafia, Cosa Nostra families. Many of my guests are familiar with that. For all you people that are coming on new, this is what we talk about. One of the many subjects that we talk about. But it's a fascinating book. I do remember, I'm pretty familiar with it. I can tell you my own perspective on it, but this is the expert. He took a lot of time writing this book. He did a lot of research, a lot of investigation, spoke and interviewed to so many people, and it's a fascinating book. I went through it. I didn't read it in its entirety, but I read a lot of it, and I'm familiar with just about everybody in the book, almost everybody, all the names that he mentioned, people that I knew. Either I knew intimately well or I knew them, you know, just from the life. But I want to read something first to give you some insight into this. This was a scandal that really did certainly rock New York. And it did rock the nation, because when you see corruption to this level, it's like, wow, do they really do this? I mean, we see corruption all the time. And I want to say this again. You know, people, the NYPD, the FBI, the government, the Catholic Church, you name it, there isn't an organization or an industry on the face of the earth that isn't in some way faced with corruption. It happens. That's life. It's just the way it is. So you don't look down on the NYPD for this. You don't look down. You know, what do? You try to fix it. You reform it. And you have to have constant reform and oversight into every agency on the face of the earth. It's just how it is. I told you, the most corrupt agencies in the world are all governments. We know that. We've seen that lately. That's the story. But let me read you the inside cover of this book so you understand what it's all about. It's fascinating. For the first time in 40 years, former New York Times editor Michael Cannell unearths the full story behind 2 ruthless New York City cops who acted as double agents for the Mafia, no doubt. No episode in NYPD history surpasses the depravities of Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa, 2 decorated detectives who covertly acted as Mafia informants and paid assassins in the Scorsese-popularized world of 1980s Brooklyn. Now, that was my time, the 1980s, obviously you know that. For more than 10 years, Eppolito and Caracappa moonlighted as the mob's early warning alert system. Leaking names of mobsters secretly cooperating with the government and crippling investigations by sharing details of surveillance, phone taps, and impending arrests. The Lucchese boss called the 2 detectives his crystal ball. Whatever the NYPD knew, the Mafia soon learned. Most grievously, Eppolito and Caracappa earned bonuses by staging 8 mob hits, pulling the trigger themselves at least once. They're alleged to have murdered, a number of people. They set up 8 hits, and allegedly they pulled the trigger on a couple. These are cops. Incredibly, when evidence of their wrongdoing arose in 1994, FBI officials failed to muster an indictment. The allegations lay dormant for a decade and were only revisited due to relentless follow-ups by Tommy Dage, he was a cop determined to break the cold case before his retirement. Eppolito and Caracappa were finally tried and then sentenced to life in prison in 2009, nearly 30 years after their crimes took place. This The whole thing happened in the 80s, and they finally went to prison for it in 2009, 30 years later. Cannell's Blood and the Badge is based on entirely new research, never before released interviews with mobsters themselves, including Sammy the Bull Gravano, somebody you're familiar with, a friend of mine. Eppolito and Caracapa's story is more relevant than ever as police conduct comes under ever increasing scrutiny. Now, once again, I don't want you to indict the entire NYPD or the entire police department throughout the country. We need the police, but we also need police reform. It happens again, like in any other organization. We're not singling them out. Now, look, Gaspipe, you know who he is, all right? He's the guy that claimed he created the whole gas scam, which wasn't true. He became a government informant. He was a big guy on the street with the Lucchese's. He was the guy that they were answering to. I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to let Michael tell it, and I'll give you my perspective, ask him my questions, and we'll get into it. But this was, a terrible blemish on the NYPD back then. And yeah, listen, people, I got to tell you this. During my time, you got to understand, there was 5 families in New York. We had 750 approximately made guys that, took the oath. We had a number of associates. We grew up in Brooklyn. There's guys that we grew up with, okay, that became cops, guys that became, government officials, that became prosecutors. We had neighbors, so, that were law enforcement. So yeah, we had our connections and we got things done. There was a police precinct in Brooklyn, I'm not going to mention it, where, at 2 o'clock in the morning on any given day during the week, I was able to go in there and look at the files because I had a relationship with some of the people in that precinct. I'm not going to mention it. Many, many years later, there's no sense to it. But again, this wasn't abnormal. We had relationships. We had relatives that were law enforcement. So those things did happen. But to this level, no, not to this degree, where cops were actually setting up, hits and pulling the trigger themselves. You see that in the movies. You don't really see that. I didn't experience that during my time. I had relationships, but we didn't experience that. So it's a fascinating story. Michael Cannell is the expert on it. He did his research, and I think you're going to be fascinated with the interview. So without any further delay, here is my very special guest, Michael Cannell.
I was Rosario Gambino's cellmate in Terminal
really?
Island for 2 years.
No kidding, really? Yeah.
Yeah, so we got pretty friendly, and he filled me in on a lot of stuff that obviously when he went through, and so I was familiar with some of the things that are written in the book, and we talked about it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I truly appreciate your taking the trouble to read it, and I appreciate that.
Well, listen, it's the most in-depth book made on that subject. I know there have been other things written about these 2 men, but you've really delved into it, and it seems very credible to me from what I know, my experience, the people I know. So I think you did a great job.
Thank you for that. I worked hard on it. It was a fun book to write, as you can imagine. Complicated, and I wasn't sure that readers would stay with me for that complicated ride. But the feedback has been good, and the book has gotten some lift off, and people have called it a page turner. So I think maybe I was wrong about it being too complicated for people.
No, I think you were. I mean, even myself, who was familiar with it, very easy to follow, and I think people will receive it the same way. I'm certainly going to promote it because I believe in it. It's a good work. And Michael, to start this off, some people look at this and they say, wow, how could 2 police officers do what they did and what's described in the book? And I tried to explain to people that back during that time, we had between all 5 families, we had about 750 made men, guys that actually took the oath. And obviously we had a lot of associates. And in all those areas of Brooklyn, Queens, even Long Island, Staten Island, we had relatives, we had neighbors, we had friends, we had kids we grew up with. Some of them went the way I went, and some of them went, the way of law enforcement and other things. But we still maintained those relationships. So it wasn't far-fetched that somebody in the mob, like myself, could have a relationship that I went to school with, or that was my neighbor, or that a relative of mine that happened to join the NYPD or police department, even the FBI. So we had those relationships. Now, that doesn't excuse, some of the activities, obviously, that these two men did. I mean, Ippolito, it was in his family. I mean, he had relatives that were involved with the family. So it wasn't too far fetched to see that these relationships were formed. Now, the fact that they took it to an extreme level, which was really by no way justified or warranted, was certainly something that was not out of the realm of possibility. So maybe you can go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, in the course of talking about this book after its publication, a lot of people have asked me why these two decorated detectives, not just decorated detectives, but really successful detectives, why they would do what they did.
My friends, if you're a homeowner, you need to pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you. Let me ask you a question. When's the last time you checked on your home title? You know what that is? That's the legal proof that you own your house. Well, if you're like me, the answer is never. Why would I check it? The problem is, in today's AI and cyber world, there are scammers out there that are stealing home titles, and your equity in your home is the target. Let me tell you how it works. Criminals forge your signature on just one document. They get a fake notary stamp, they pay a small fee with your county, and boom, your home title has been transferred out of your name and into theirs. And then you know what they do? They take out loans. They use your equity, or you know what? They can even sell your property. You won't even know it's happened. Not until you get a collection or a foreclosure notice from your bank. That's why you need to stop what you're doing right now, and I mean right now, and find out today if you might already be a victim. Use promo code MF14 at HometitleLock.com to make sure your title is still in your name right now. You'll also get a free title history report, plus a free 14-day trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. And what you get with that is 24/7 monitoring of your title. You'll get an urgent alert if there's any changes in your title. And if fraud should happen, they'll spend up to $1 million of their own money to fix it, because they got insurance. So go to HometitleLock.com right now. Use promo code MF14. That's HometitleLock.com, promo code MF14. And as I always tell you, people, that's an offer you shouldn't refuse.
Why they would go on to the payroll of the Lucchese crime family. And it's hard to answer that question without psychoanalyzing them, and I don't really want to psychoanalyze them. I don't feel responsible doing that. But what I will say is that in Louis Ippolito's case, as you know, he was born into a mafia family. His father was a capo, known as Fat the Gangster. His uncle was a capo, um, Jimmy the Clam.
Mhm.
Um, when his father died of a heart attack, just a matter of weeks later, Louis joined the police academy, and it was an act of rebellion against his family. So I think it didn't take very long for him to figure out that some of the MO, some of the techniques of the underworld applied pretty well to being a beat cop. And I think what happened with Louis is that he in that early period he was trying to be a good cop. I think for all of us, it's hard to escape the entanglements of our family. It's a very common story, right? And so it wasn't long before he was drawn back into his family and friends and doing favors. What's a little harder to figure is that he wasn't content with these sort of mid-level corruptions or associations. He and his closest friend and partner, Stephen Caracappa, were paid $4,000 a month by Gaspipe Casso, the under Boston Lucchese family. So they were passing sensitive police information, FBI information, DEA information to Gaspipe. I mean, most importantly, what they were doing was identifying who the informants were, right? and then they were paid a bonus to facilitate the murder of those informants, and they did various degrees of help. I mean, anything from just providing the home address to, at least in one case, pulling the trigger themselves. So just to kind of get back to your question, I mean, I think in Louis Eppolito's mind there was always maybe some confusion about his identity. Was he a detective masquerading as a mafiosi? Was he a mafiosi masquerading as a detective? I don't know that he was ever really clear about it. And for his friend and partner, Stephen Caracappa, I mean, that's a harder question. I mean, I spoke to a detective once who worked with him in the major case squad who said, of course, Caracappa was doing it for the money. I don't know that. I mean, that may have on some level been true, but I think there was more to it than that. There had to be, I think. I mean, they committed these crimes for more than a decade. The most serious crimes a policeman can commit, and I don't think it was about the money. I think that Caracappa, on some level, wanted to have this secret life. It was gratifying to him in some way, and he liked, getting it over on people. Um, so, you know, I think that the degree of their involvement in all of this shocked people when the story really came out. I mean, I know for a fact that at least a handful of the detectives who worked around them had a lot of suspicions about them, but when it all came out, I don't think anybody could really at first believe what they had done.
Yeah, the extent of their involvement was really shocking, I have to say. And I had heard about them, but I wasn't deeply involved. I learned more about them after I went to prison and was with Rosario, at least about Ippolito. He wasn't really sure about Stephen. He didn't know too much about him. But let me ask you, because even though I was on the street at the time and I understand this, you've really done the investigation. You're more the expert of it. Do you think Eppolito was anyway resentful after his uncle, the clam, got killed? Um, why did he enter the police force to begin with, in your opinion? Why do you think he even got involved when his family was all mob guys?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a real like I wish I could nail that the answer to that, but I can't really nail it. I mean, his father, no surprise, was an abusive character, and I think he grew up in
Yeah.
an abusive household, and his father was a big one for whacking Louis around, and lots of talk about the Sicilian code of honor. And I think, Louis was a sick kid. He was, I mean, physically sick. He was ill as a kid, and so I think there was this sense maybe in his mind that he wasn't measuring up to his father's idea of, macho ideal. And the only thing I could say is that I think he joined the police department as an act of rebellion. It was maybe liberating for him to join the other team, at least for a while. I think he discovered pretty quickly that he couldn't really escape his family. I mean, there's a story there in the book about how he was in the police academy, and one of the instructors was showing the recruits, the family tree of the five families. And one of the other rookie cops said, "Oh, hey, Louis, look, there's somebody with your last name." And Louis said, "Yeah, that's my father." So it didn't take long, I think, for him to figure out that it was harder to get away than he thought.
And do you think he had any resentment towards the NYPD for just, or law enforcement in general at some point for going after his family?
I do, yeah. I mean, the story about Rosario Gambino, just very briefly for those who don't know it, is that the FBI and New Jersey State Police raided Gambino's home in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and they found to their surprise that Gambino had his own police file in his possession, and then they found Louis Eppolito's fingerprints on it.
Yeah.
So Eppolito, of course, went before Internal Affairs. His case was dismissed. The reason for his case being dismissed has never really been addressed or resolved. But not only was it dismissed, but they promoted him to detective second grade and invited him to pick whatever precinct in the city he wanted to work in. So of course he picked the 6-3, and so he would be back among his people. But what he said after that, I mean, the reason I'm saying all of this is that what he said after that was that the police had framed him. They had framed him because he was Italian American. They had framed him because of his association with a mobbed up family. Um, he went on to a documentary about anger management and discussed his anger towards the police department in great detail. So how much of that anger was real and how much of it was just kind of an act in which he was kind of pretending to be indignant about being framed when in fact he wasn't framed. And I don't even know that he was really angry. I think it may have been just a kind of a posture.
Michael, was the case dismissed? Because I know originally he denied giving Gambino those papers, and then they presented him with the fact that his fingerprints were on them,
Yeah.
and that was at that point undeniable. Was it dismissed even after they presented him with the fingerprint
It,
proof?
it
Wow.
was dismissed. So I don't know if we want to kind of get into the weeds on this, but the
Was it a
trial,
cover up?
the trial for reasons that are to this day remain unclear. And believe me, I tried to find out. The trial was conducted on what they call on stipulation, which means that there wouldn't be any new evidence introduced. There wouldn't be witnesses. There would just be there would just be the information available to the judge that both sides agreed on. So that really limited the information that the judge could see, and the judge dismissed it, and the case had to go to the police commissioner. In those days, that was Benjamin Ward, and so he signed it, and that was that. I mean, people have asked me, why did this happen? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I tried really hard to find out, but the best answer I can give is just that Benjamin Ward did not have the appetite for another police scandal, another corruption scandal. He didn't have the appetite for any more embarrassing headlines.
I think that could be the only explanation. They didn't want this to hit the media. They
Yeah, I
wanted to
think that's
keep it
right.
quiet. But to give him a promotion and send him to any precinct that he wanted, that's a little bit overkill, I would say, in trying to bury this.
Yeah, I think they were. I mean, I think what they were trying to do is to get him to make him happy and get him to not, not honk about it, not talk about it very much. So they were sort of in a sense maybe kind of buying him off.
Yeah, exactly. And let me ask you this, because I myself have a little bit of issue with some of Gaspipe's testimony on other things, because he had talked about, something that involved me. He had said that he was the one that created the gas business, the gas tax scam, I would say, which was totally untrue.
Yeah.
But he claimed credit for some things that I knew he wasn't intimately involved with. Do you think he was on the level with everything he talked about with respect to both Eppolito and Caracappa?
My instinct, Michael, is that he was on the level.
Yeah.
And the reason that I say that is that when Gaspipe flipped and they took him to La Tuna, the prison down by the Mexican border, and the FBI debriefed him. I can't remember how long it was. It was weeks of debriefing. And then the federal prosecutors and their investigators set out to corroborate what he had said. And what those investigators had said to me in the course of reporting this book was that everything checked out.
So he was credible when it came to them.
I think so, but I mean, as you know, part of this story is about the ways in which Gaspipe may have been telling the truth about some things, but he was hard for the prosecutors to use.
Yeah.
And ultimately they didn't use him. So he was one of the few people who really knew what Eppolito and Caracappa had done, but he didn't end up being a workable witness. And so Gaspipe ripped up his plea agreement. He went
Yeah.
to Supermax, as you know, died of COVID in Supermax, I think 4 years ago.
Yeah. 4 or 5 years ago. It was
Yeah,
recent, fairly recent.
yeah,
I
and
don't know if I don't know if you ever heard this, Michael, but I heard one of the main reasons they didn't continue with Gaspipe was because of the things that he had said about Sammy Gravano. And Sammy was doing what he was doing at the time, and they didn't want there was a conflict in the stories, from what I understood.
that's exactly right. That's what the federal prosecutors who worked on the case told me exactly, that
Mm,
they were in a dilemma because on the one hand they had Gaspipe who knew everything that Eppolito and Caracappa had done and was willing to testify against them. He was willing to play the role of the insider who could testify against them. But on the other hand, he was bad mouthing Sammy, the bull. And so, they had spent all of that time trying to prosecute Gotti and finally succeeded. And they did not want they did not
yeah.
want that to be undone. And so they chose, I mean, it must have been a hard choice, but they chose to send Gaspipe away, knowing that what it meant, at least for the foreseeable future, was that Eppolito and Caracappa would walk.
Did you ever, and that's what I heard, did you ever have the opportunity to speak to either one of the detectives?
No, no, I didn't. They passed away
Oh,
before I
okay.
started working on this. And I did speak to Eppolito's son, who
Hmm.
was very gracious and willing to talk to me. He had been estranged from his father for many years, and had come when Eppolito finally did go to trial. His son, Lou Jr., went to the courtroom every day of the trial. And what he said to me was that he came to the courthouse with an open mind, and he really wanted to know honestly if his father was guilty or not. He wanted to know what his father had done or had not done.
Did he
Um,
come? Did he come away after watching? Because I know they maintained their innocence. Did he come away after the trial believing his father was guilty?
he did.
Mm.
He did. And there was, of course, I mean, part of what is so interesting to me about writing about these cases that end in the courtroom is that it's like all of the players come together and the truth comes out, or a lot of the truth comes out. And so Lou Jr. sat in awkward proximity to his stepmother and half sisters that he did not have a good relationship with.
Mm.
And in fact, they had a confrontation, a kind of semi-violent confrontation in the parking garage. Unfortunate. Um, so Lou Jr. came with an open mind. His half sisters and stepmother, of course, did not. They vocally maintained Lou's innocence, and his daughter Andrea, I think, was a very effective spokesperson for him, standing out in Cadman Plaza outside the courthouse every afternoon. She would speak to the press. But to answer your question, I never spoke to Eppolito and Caracappa, but they were gone. I spoke to Eppolito's son. I had an email correspondence with Caracappa's wife, widow. We had a nice correspondence, but she never agreed to be formally interviewed.
You know, it's amazing. There is a very well-known writer in the industry in Hollywood. He writes scripts. Nice guy, friend of mine, but he had met with Eppolito quite a few times, and he had gotten in touch with me because he said, "This man is innocent, and I'm writing about it, and I'm going to do whatever I can to try to help him get out of prison." And he actually wanted me to engage in that, and I said, that's not for me at this moment. I've got different things I'm doing in my life. But he was convinced that Ippolito was innocent, and he said, Michael, there's so much that never came out. And I said, look, I don't want to get into it with you, but I don't know on what basis he was convinced, whether Ippolito was just good at revealing his side of the story. I don't know, but it was pretty fascinating to me that that fella had come out so strongly in their behalf, and he's just a Hollywood writer. He had no
Hmm.
relation whatsoever.
I mean, it would be fascinating to know what the details of what he had in mind. Of course, Caracappa's wife said the same thing to me, that they were framed and that they were innocent. But I don't, it's hard to accept that when you don't know what the details might be.
Right. Let me ask you, Michael, for my viewers, what do you think during this whole 10-year period or so? What do you think is the worst of the worst that these two men pulled off? And I think my viewers, because they're really intrigued by this, I think they'd like to know from your perspective and your investigation.
Well, I think certainly the most tragic episode in this story is the murder of a young man named Nicky Guido. I believe he was 26 years old. Um, it was a case of mistaken identity. There was a man named Nicky Guido who had been part of the crew that tried to assassinate Gaspipe um, outside of a strip mall. Gaspipe was sitting in his car eating an ice cream cone. They pulled up, they opened fire. I guess, if you're going to try to kill Gaspipe, you'd better kill him. They didn't.
Yeah.
And he ran into the restaurant and hid in a kind of a big walk-in refrigerator used for catering in the basement. And Gaspipe, not surprisingly, spent the following years trying to figure out who was involved in this botched hit. And there was a man named Nicky Guido. I think my memory is that he was driving the car. Um, so because Stephen Caracappa was working in the major case squad, and what's more, he was the detective in the major case squad responsible for collecting information and organizing the records and the information. He had access to everything, of course. So he passed along Nicky Guido's address to Gaspipe, and Gaspipe sent some guys over. They killed Nicky Guido on Christmas Day outside his family home. It was just the wrong Nicky Guido. It was just a case of
Wow.
mistaken identity. But this young man was, by all accounts, a good kid. He'd applied to join the fire department. He was taking his uncle outside to show him his new car. His father essentially died of a broken heart. He just stopped taking his medications and died. I think it
Wow.
was 3 years later. So as you would expect, it kind of destroyed the family. And I mean, we could talk about any number of murders in this case, a lot of murders.
Yeah.
But that's the one that I think really sticks out. And in fact, it's worth noting that years later, when Bert Kaplan,
Hmm.
the I don't I don't know how to describe him. He was a drug dealer, but that's not really
Yeah.
a sufficient way to describe him. He was sort of a drug magnate, and he was the intermediary between Eppolito and Caracappa and Gaspipe.
Yes. Right.
He was the go-between, right?
Yeah.
So years later, when Bert is in detention, an investigator mentions Nicky Guido to him, and apparently that was that was part of what brought Bert Kaplan around
Yeah.
to flip and eventually testify against Eppolito and Caracappa, was that he had never really gotten over the this episode with Nicky, the tragic death of Nicky Guido.
Now, Eppolito didn't actually pull the trigger on that, but he just provided the information, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
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 Well, bad enough, but another fascinating thing I didn't know was that they were out to get Sammy Gravano. They actually tailed him and thought they might have had him at some point. I don't know if Sammy knew that until later on. Obviously, he didn't. But what was the reason behind that? What was the? Did you ever get to the bottom of that with Gaspipe? Did he ever talk about it?
Gosh, I'm embarrassed to say I can't. I'd have to go back and look at my notes. One thing, as you know about writing a book, is that sometimes it's a long time between when you write it and when
Yes,
when it comes out. So, am I correct in thinking that there was long-standing bad blood there between
must have
Gaspipe
been.
and yeah, I think that
I,
was
I,
it.
don't- I, I'm wondering how Gaspipe had the authority to do that, where it came from. I think it came from Castellano. It had to at that time. But I didn't think there was any problem between Paul and Sammy to trigger something like that. And I think I didn't, I was kind of amazed because I said, how did Gaspipe had the authority to do that and got it from Paul? I thought Sammy was in good graces there, at least initially.
Well, I'm not sure I can really give you a good answer on that, but the details, as you know, the details of the situation were that they were following Sammy and by Tally's bar in his office,
Mhm.
and they might very well have gotten him if not for just this purely chance
Yeah,
encounter with another detective, another cop who came up and said, "Hey, what are you guys doing here?"
yeah,
And then once they'd kind of been made in the location, they figured they couldn't stick around and pursue it. And apparently, gas Gaspipe was pretty pissed off about it and put his own men on the
yeah.
case. And of course, that was it.
I could tell you this, Michael, you wouldn't imagine how many times, a hit like that was foiled just out of circumstance, something that they didn't know and things had to be planned over again. And, unfortunately, I should say it happens in that life or would have been a different outcome with Sammy. But, and from what I understand too, one of the things they did was they were going after informants and they were giving most information on people that were going to flip or whatever. And it's funny, I'm not going to mention the name of the precinct, but I had a connection with a law enforcement person. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd be able to go into the precinct and look through the files.
Hmm. Hmm.
And when that happened, I would have gloves on because I didn't want and he wouldn't allow us to photocopy anything. We had to remember it or write it on a
Hmm.
notepad. But so something like this on that level wasn't too out of the ordinary. We had relations with the NYPD, but never again, never to this extraordinary extent. I wasn't aware of anything like that, certainly with our family, with the Colombos. But, some other informants that, were murdered as a result of their activities, you could talk about that.
Yeah, I mean there was a member of the burglary, the bypass gang, the burglary group, I thought the bypass gang was fascinating. I mean, they were right out of Ocean's 11. These guys
Yeah.
who would go into banks or luxury goods stores on holiday weekends and spend 3 days in the bank. They'd bring food in and kind of make almost like a weekend out of it. And they were very sophisticated about the way in which they deflected the alarms or turned off the alarms. Um, One of the members of that crew was a man named Otto Heidel,
Hmm.
and was he was arrested for an unrelated crime. I believe he was caught loading stolen goods into a rented truck, and the FBI got him, and he flipped pretty much immediately on the spot. And what he told the agent that was talking to him was that his wife looked like Marilyn Monroe. He had a beautiful wife, and he didn't think that she would be faithful if he went to prison. And it kind of tortured him. And so he flipped immediately and worked with an FBI handler for many years as a paid informant, while he continued to work with the bypass gang. Then he was, if you're a informant, as Otto Heidel was, there are certain things you can do and can't do, and he broke those rules. The FBI kind of kicked him out, and they broke their agreement. And then he started to work as an informant for the NYPD. And then Stephen Caracappa was able to see his paperwork. So now Caracappa knows that Otto Heidel is an informant, and he passes that information along to Gaspipe. And one day, Otto Heidel was playing handball or racquetball in Marine Park, and he goes back to his car, this flat tire, lies down on the ground. He's shot. He gets up, he's able to get up, and he runs up the street, and they come after him, and that's it for Otto Heidel. So, that's a case of I think that's a case of Otto Heidel he was not really a mob guy. I mean, he was not a hardened criminal. He was a member of this burglary crew. And so, omertà kind of didn't really apply to him, I guess.
Yeah,
And
and was that I don't recall if that group of that, burglary group was in any way affiliated with us at that time. Were they?
I don't think so. I mean, Gaspipe had some association with them, but he wasn't really operating it. So I don't know exactly. Maybe they kicked money up to him. I don't really
Yeah.
know. Um, but I mentioned that. So there was another guy who worked for the bypass gang who became an informant and then went into the witness protection program, kind of very similar circumstances. Um, and they sent him to a town in northern Minnesota where he really stuck out because he had the thick Brooklyn accent, and he's there in Minnesota. And he was living in an apartment across the street from a bank, and he's in the witness protection program, and it's driving him crazy to look out the window and see this bank every day. And it would be so easy.
Yeah.
So one day he goes over, and he and one other guy go over and break into the bank, but they get caught. And of
Mm,
course, he's thrown out of the witness protection program.
yeah.
There was a guy named I'll mention one other very quickly. There was a guy named DiNapoli.
Mhm.
So he was, I guess, not on the level with his loan sharking, and was not showing his books to Gaspipe. And then he decided he was going to disappear. He went out to Los Angeles. So Stephen Caracappa was able to track him down. I mean, DiNapoli had a probation officer. So Caracappa, in his capacity as a detective, just called up the probation officer. Probation officer said he's in Los Angeles. So then Caracappa called a police detective in the LAPD and said, "What do you know about DiNapoli?" And he said, "Well, he's living with his girlfriend in West Hollywood." And so that was it for DiNapoli. So it was one story after another in which Eppolito and Caracappa, partially because of their access to the paperwork, were able to pass the critical information along to Gaspipe.
It's amazing. And, during this 10-year period, I mean, were these officers actually doing their job also? I mean, their normal job as NYPD detectives? Were they making arrests? Were they doing everything they should do? I mean, I know there was a lot of suspicion about them within the department, but they had to be conducting their duties. Otherwise, what are they doing there?
Yeah, I mean, interesting question. I mean, I mean, Eppolito was. The thing is that Caracappa was in the major case squad, and so he really didn't go out on the street hardly at all. In this later part of this story, he's just in police plaza. He's in police headquarters on the 10th floor. I can't remember what floor it is. And he didn't go out and make arrests. So he was just kind of at the nerve center. But I think Eppolito did. I mean, Eppolito had, you know, he had good arrest records.
Mhm.
And did he earn those good arrest records? Or was he helped out by Gaspipe and others who might have pointed him in the right direction? Or was he framing people? We know of at least one case in which he framed somebody for the murder of a prostitute whose body was found by the Belt Parkway. So hard to know if he really was earning his arrest record or if he was relying on Gaspipe and others to help him.
Just from reading the book, I think you come away with the conclusion that this was just a bad guy, Eppolito. He wasn't. I always look for some redeeming qualities, and we could talk about his upbringing, and he had a rough time. His mom died when he was young, and his father was who he was. Uh, but when you look at his activities, as written in the book, he was just not a good guy. Period.
Yeah, I mean, he was not a good guy. I mean, these two guys, they were sort of like Laurel and Hardy in a way. They were opposites of each other. It's like sometimes partners are opposites, and
Yeah.
Eppolito was like a big, loud, boastful
Yes.
guy, kind of a bullshitter, a loud bullshitter. And his partner and best friend, Caracappa, was absolutely the opposite. He was
Skinny.
always meticulously dressed in a dark suit and very quiet, always quietly watching and listening what was going on. I mean, I think there was, I spoke to a DEA agent who, at the end of this story, Eppolito and Caracappa are living in Las Vegas, and a
Right.
DEA agent is following them around, is following Caracappa around, and he said there were two occasions when he and Caracappa locked eyes. And one of them was in a gas station. And he said it gave him the chills. It was just something so, in his mind, um, disturbing and creepy about Caracappa. And, this is coming from a DEA agent who had seen some
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Did you have an opportunity to speak to some of their, fellow NYPD people that knew them
Oh, yeah, a
quite a
lot of
bit,
them.
a lot of them,
A
and
lot of them, yeah.
what was their reaction to all of this? Were they surprised? Were they,
Well,
hey, I suspected something? What was their reaction?
I mean, I mean, part of what is so interesting to me anyway is that part this was that some of the detectives had independently decided, like, that their suspicions about Caracappa in particular were such that they were not going to share anything with him anymore. They were just going to not, they were going to, in one case, a detective took an investigation he was working on to the Manhattan DA's office because he was
Mm.
just not going to do it through the major case squad because he didn't trust Caracappa. There was an accumulation of little things that were suspicious. There was a detective named Frank Pergola who worked in the major case squad but had been loaned out to the Manhattan DA's office. And he came by the old office, the major case office, and he put his briefcase down on a desk and he talked to Caracappa for a while. And then he went to the bathroom. And then he came back. And then he had to drive up to a precinct in Midtown. And while he was in the precinct in Midtown, his car was broken into and his
Mm.
briefcase was stolen. And he doesn't know, but he thinks that while he was in the bathroom, Caracappa looked in his briefcase and figured out
Wow.
what was in his briefcase. And he knew where Frank Pergola was going because Frank Pergola told him that he was going up to the precinct in Midtown. So there was an accumulation of episodes like that. So there were some detectives that were suspicious enough that they were a little careful about what information they shared. But I mean, as I said at the beginning, as we discussed, I think when all of this information came out about what Eppolito and Caracappa had done, um, I mean, people just kind of couldn't believe it. Um, Detective Tommy Dades, who's one of the great figures in this book, told me that he went to a Dunkin' Donuts to get coffee one morning on his way to work, and there was a Daily News. Somebody had leaked information about what Gaspipe had been saying about these two cops. It was on the cover of the Daily News. And Tommy told me that he just didn't, it just was beyond belief, but it was true.
Wow. Well, I tell you, Michael, it really is fascinating. And like I said, I don't think anybody has done such an in-depth investigation and the research that you've done and meticulously reported, I would say. So it's fascinating. And I even learned something, and that was my life. So, things in there I'm not even going to get into, but, some of the people that I knew and you really did a good job on it. I can tell you that.
Thank you, Michael. I
So,
appreciate I appreciate that. I truly appreciate that.
yeah, and I'm going to recommend that the book be read. I think people would be fascinated. Did anybody talk to you about from Hollywood about doing a series or a movie on this?
There have been some inquiries. We'll see what happens. I do think it's a really cinematic story.
Yeah,
And of course, South you as you know better than anybody, South Brooklyn in those days,
yeah,
it's Scorsese country.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I would think at the very least there would have been a documentary style, series on this already because it's fascinating. I mean, the extent that these two detectives have gone to it even blows my mind. You never expect that.
Well, we'll see what happens. Like I do think it has, it's a movie-like story.
Yeah. And, Michael, I have said this. I want to see if you agree. A lot of people, wow, the police department, oh, wow. And I've said to them, and this was during the time when they were trying to defund the police. And I've maintained this. I said, listen, every agency, every institution in the country, in the world could use some kind of reform. No institution is perfect. No agency is perfect. You can talk about government. You can talk about the Catholic Church. You can talk about, nonprofit foundations. Everything needs reform. But on the whole, these police departments operate, I believe, the way they're supposed to in service to the people that they're defending and protecting. And this is, certainly an incident to this degree, I think is an isolated incident. So you shouldn't judge departments or judge the police by something as dramatic as this. But, it's just the way of life. Everything can use some kind of reform. So it shouldn't come as that shocking when you hear some of these things that happen But, some people say, come on, Michael, you hated the police all your life. I said, well, that was back then. That was when I was on the other side of the street and I had a different, thought process, but I've been able to straighten that out. They were the good guys and we were the bad guys for the most part. And all we ever said to them is, listen, if you get us the right way, fine. Just don't frame us. We did say that. But I just want people to know as we wrap this up that, every police department is not, fraudulent. They're not corrupt. But you have bad apples in every bunch everywhere in America. So just don't be too shocked when you hear something. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that 100%, and I've tried to make the same point in some interviews for this book. You said it better than I could have. This story is a freakish aberration, but
Mm,
if you read the book, you'll see that the majority of the vast majority of the cops in this story are um, dedicated, hardworking public servants, and I think that's generally true.
yeah. Well, I agree with you. And Michael, I'm going to be honest with you. When I first sat down, I said, wow, there are so many things in this book that I can spend a lot of we could talk for about 6 hours if if we had the time, because so many things in there that I would ask you about, just even on a personal level with people that I knew, but we're not going to do that. I think we've given people a pretty good idea of what went on here. And like I said, I'll recommend the book. I think it's a page turner. I agree with that. And I thank you for doing the hard work that you did.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate it. I really, truly appreciate your interest.
And I may be on top as I get through and I get a little more thought. I may call you back and say, "All right, Mike, we didn't cover this, but this is something that I
Please
want to
do.
talk about." So we may do it again.
Please do. I'm always here for that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, so there you have it, and I'll give you a little bit more insight. Like I mentioned during in the interview, I was cellmates with Rosario Gambino, and he was one of the guys that were dealing with Eppolito. And we were cellmates in Terminal Island for 2 years. So I had a lot of insight into what these cops were doing with Rosario, who was a good friend of mine. And we got along very well. So he told me a lot more. I'm not going to get into it all now. Obviously, Kaiso Gaspipe, I knew him fairly well. Um, it's a fascinating story, people. What could I tell you? It was something that we've never seen before to this degree. We've seen it in the movies, but we've never seen it in real life. But it happens. And I think, he told what he knew very convincingly. It's amazing sometimes how we find out more about what went on in the street from guys like Michael Cannell and sometimes from FBI agents or cops because they're dealing with, guys that were informants and they're investigating this and they're hearing wiretaps and they're looking at surveillance reports and they're hearing guys talk in their own words, their own voice. So we get more information from these people than we did with our own people at times. But look, it's fascinating, very sad. Excuse me. I'm going to do that again, people. Editors, outro again, because I had to keep it on, Cam. Don't change it. All right, there you have it. And I mentioned throughout the interview that, I was cellmates with Rosario Gambino, who was one of the people dealing with Eppolito. He was getting some information from him. We were cellmates for 2 years in Terminal Island. Good guy. So I knew a lot more, about what was going on. He kind of filled me in. And Queso, I knew Queso pretty well, but, I didn't get into this with him. He didn't share anything with me. And he's dead now, all the problems that he had. He was an informant. He started fingering a lot of people, and then they threw him out of the program. It was a whole mess with him. But I think a lot of what Cannell reported, pretty accurate. And listen, I don't know the inside story about, how many guys they killed. That I don't know. I mean, the investigation is what it is. In that life, eventually you're going to get caught. You're going to get caught. People talk. They get in trouble. They talk. People don't want to go to jail. This is what happens. So, if you're to that level of corruption, the level that they got into, it's only a matter of time. And with them was 30 years later, but it's only a matter of time. You're going to go down. It's what I tell our young people all the time. You stay in criminal activity, you got other people around you, it's only a matter of time before you're going down. You're not going to get away with it forever. That's it. You know, it's a dead-end street. So fascinating story, sad story of corruption. Again, don't indict the entire NYPD or all the police. Don't start jumping up and down. We need to defund them. No, we don't need to do that. We just need to make sure that there's adequate oversight and reform when needed. So, my friends, that's it for today. How do I always leave you? Same way. Before I leave you, remember michaelfranzese.com/family. Join the family, join the community. It's growing in leaps and bounds, and people are benefiting by it and loving it. You want more of me? That's the place to go. You need mentorship. You need to learn about negotiation. And, negotiation, we're undergoing one right now. America is, you know what I'm talking about, Trump, tariffs, all this stuff. Let me tell you how to negotiate. You know, it was something that I was intimately involved in throughout my entire life and fairly successful. So, michaelfranzese.com/family. How do I always leave you? Again, same way. Be safe, my friends. Be healthy. And yes, God bless each and every one of you, your families, friends, neighborhoods. God bless America. I'll see you next time.